press the record button here so we can make sure we get the whole thing recorded. Awesome. So what I would like for each one of you to do first, and we're going to start with Evan and then go to Whitney and then John Casmon and then Jason Yarusi. Going to have you guys go in that order just for the introduction. And then after the introduction, let you guys kind of jump in as you guys feel need. Okay. I don't want you to feel like you have to go in that particular order. So we'll start off with you, Evan. What I would like for you to do is share a little bit about yourself and your background, and also share with us your podcast as well. So if we want to be able to follow you after this, if we like what you have to say, we will continue to follow you. So Evan, go ahead and take it away.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Dan, and really glad to be here. So I have been doing multifamily for about the last 10 years, specialize in ground up new construction, multifamily, typically 200 plus unit developments throughout the Southeast. I'm based here in Nashville. I'm actually at my dad's house in Cincinnati. But yeah, but yeah, so I do multifamily new construction development, and also getting into acquisition as well. And excited to be here. Also, the podcast is Monumental Podcast. You can find that at evanholladay.com. Is that good, Dan?
That's good.
All right, I'm Whitney Sewell. I'm host of the daily real estate syndication show. And just right off the bat, I just have to give Dan Hanford a big thank you. And I'm just extremely humbled by his generosity and just this entire community. I'm speechless about it. I don't even know what to say. But Dan, thank you so much. Our family is just very humbled by your generosity and just this whole community. It's been amazing to see this happen. But a little bit about me. I was a police officer at one time and knew that I had to increase my income. I wasn't sure what that was going to look like, and that's what pushed us into real estate. And at that time, it was a small multifamily, and I never even thought that it was possible to buy a large apartment building. That's something I seen that was like years and years down the road if it ever happened. And then learned about this thing called syndication, and that's what it really opened my eyes to this is possible, and it's possible to have a professional business and operate, as a business and scale fast. And found a mentor and helped me through this process of learning this business, syndication business, and then ultimately, obviously, starting the daily real estate syndication show. And here we are. We just closed on 180 units a couple of weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, and so we're just excited about where we're going and pushing forward.
All right, John Casmon here. And Evan, that response I gave when you said you were in Cincinnati is I actually just moved to Cincinnati.
No way.
I'm actually at my sister's place right now, and all of my stuff is in a U-Haul. So I'm recording from another place as well. So I should have just came over to your dad's house and
yeah, exactly.
Together. So as I mentioned, kind of a new transplant here to Cincinnati. Originally from Cleveland, lived in Chicago prior to this. And, I'm the host of the Target Market Insights podcast. And we really talk about, market research, started off really focusing on market research and then expanded to more marketing, branding tips to help multifamily investors grow their portfolio. For us, it really came down to, really looking at ways to build our portfolio. One of the challenges that I ran into was money. Like many investors, we started off with duplex that we house hacked. We bought a 3-unit building, an 8-unit building. We did a couple flips. And as we were investing in these projects, we would always use our own capital. And it was great. We built a $1.5 million portfolio, but all the money that I made was going right back into these properties. And at one point I started to scratch my head and said, there's got to be another way. And at that point, I started to learn about other people's money and syndication and partnering, because I had friends who would say, hey man, looks like you guys are doing some great things. And I would talk to them about it and say, oh, you should do it. Here's how you do it. And they would say, yeah, I'm not really going to do all of that. And at a certain point, it just kind of clicked that, hey, maybe we can partner with some of these people to do deals. And from there, it kind of launched into how do we build a brand? How do we start to communicate with other people? And the podcast was the natural choice, which I know we'll talk about more during this session.
All right, I am up. And Whitney, I did not know you used to be a police officer. Lesson, new facts learned today. So that's really cool. Thank you for that. So I'm Jason University, host of the Real Estate Investing Foundation podcast with my wife, Peely, who usually brings a lot more to the podcast than I do, but I do what I can. So heavy construction background, family company. We have a very niche thing where we actually lift and move buildings, done that for about 45 years. And just with the work that we did in that, it's been so busy since Hurricane Sandy happened up here that it just got to the point where we were just working night and day. We could work. If there was 25 hours in a day, we could use it. And it just dawned on me that we needed a new direction, and that direction just came down to real estate. And we got involved in, active projects, flipping the other point, just thinking that was the cure, just to learn that we were just really creating ourselves with another job and really just another part that was really just making our busy day even busier. That led us down to starting to do some smaller multifamily investments and just looking at what you could really get from that, really just evolving that into basically investing in large apartment buildings. And that led us really to about 2 years ago to diving in all hands on deck into large multifamily, and really has been great. We started out in Kentucky, closed on a 94 unit, and that's led us to really be a part of close to about 500 units today. Podcast has been great. It's been a great evolution for us, really just to give back from what we've learned. Covers all kinds of gamuts. We do have a multifamily Monday that we target on, and we also do a core business and self day, foundation inspection Friday, where we dive in, which is great because I have a small young family, 3 kids under 5, wife who's super active, and I run a ton. So just figuring out how we can be the most and productive in our day. That's really the goal. So excited to be on the panel today, and let's get after it.
Awesome. Well, I have my first question that I want to give to you guys. And so for those of you who are watching, I have a list of questions here that I'm going to use as starting points, and each one of them have had a chance to review these, kind of know which questions I'm going to be throwing at them. But I do want you guys, as you are listening as an attendee, to ask some questions if you have them, and we will pose them to the panel to get those questions answered. So the first question that I want to pose to everybody is, what considerations should somebody take when they are thinking about starting a podcast? And you guys can go in any order, so there's no order for the panel at this point forward.
All right, I'll jump in there if nobody's going. So ideally for this point, you just want to think of your core concept and something you're passionate about, especially if you're going to start doing it like Whitney and be a nut and do one every single day, which is just outrageous. So if you're going to talk about a topic, you want to be just solely in developed to just know who that is and also who your audience is going to be. Because ultimately, if you have a topic in mind, whether it's, real estate investing, well, what core of real estate investing? Are you covering a wide gamut? Are you focusing just on notes? Are you focusing on multifamily syndication? Or if you're talking about fitness, are you talking about running? Are you talking about hardcore training? What is it that you're going to get passionate about? Because ultimately that's going to be something that you're going to speak to day in and day out. And it's going to help you better relate if you can think about who is that target audience, because generally you're not going to reach everybody. And if your goal is to reach everybody, you're ultimately going to fail. But if you know who that in person is, who you're trying to talk to, whether it's passive investors, whether it's people who's trying to, lose a couple pounds or eat better, you're ultimately going to have a much better focus, and your podcast has that much more of an opportunity to succeed.
One thing I would add, while you need to know your niche, you got to niche down. You got to know who your audience is going to be, just like Jason is saying. One thing I would add, though, is understand the time commitment that it's going to take, and understand the family commitment, that your family or your spouse, understands the commitment of what you're fixing to do and how much time it's going to take. And I would have to say, if my spouse was not extremely supportive of this mission, we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. And so, because it's a burden on her as well, she has to be a part of this team, and I'm thankful that she is, and we're making it happen. So just, one thing outside of the normal niche focus and all those things, but just understand the time commitment and the cost.
Yeah, just to build on what Whitney was saying, I think understanding your goal is going to be critical, because if you're coming into this with something specific, that may or may not happen based on podcasting. So really understanding what your goal is, what are the resources necessary to execute and deliver on that. For you, Whitney, Dan, you also do the daily podcast plus a second podcast on top of that. And, you have to understand why you're doing that, because it's easy to start and launch. But I talk to a lot of people who are enthusiastic about doing a podcast. Maybe they record 3 to 5 episodes and they never come out. And part of it is that they realize that, hey, it's relatively easy to set up an interview, but going through the editing process, the show notes, the posting, everything that it takes to actually publish the podcast and then do it on a consistent basis certainly takes time. So you definitely want to understand what your goals are and be clear about that so you can stay committed to that if you're going to launch a show.
Yeah, and to add to what everybody said, I think it's exactly right. It's you got to have your niche, you got to have your goals, you have to understand the time commitment. The other things that I've told people, people that have come to me asking for advice on how to start podcasts is, make sure you're educating yourself all about podcasts. Like I spent weeks of just like devouring content of what it takes to start a podcast. John Lee Dumas has a great course on how to actually start a podcast, and he takes you step by step. So knowing that it's going to take time, but then also knowing that if you can put the right systems in place, then you can really cut down on the amount of time you're taking it. But typically the launch is where the vast majority of your time is going to be spent, because you're having to do things for the very first time. And there are things that you only have to do once, like picking your cover art, picking your logo, picking your name, buying your domain, like all those things you're going to have to do on the front end. But that's something that if you know that ahead of time, if you know that it's going to be a time commitment on the front end, then you'll be better prepared for it. The only other thing I would say on top of that is commit. Like really commit to like keep going. And that's something that I've had to hold myself accountable to as well. But it's like, if you can commit to saying, okay, this is my goal for the podcast. This is how much I'm going to put it out. Whitney's putting it out every day. It's like that like systematic approach to saying, okay, I'm going to hold myself accountable to a weekly podcast or 3 times weekly or whatever it is. Decide that ahead of time, and you can always change it later, but make sure you commit to something and stick with it. Because I think if you hold yourself accountable, then you will end up having a great podcast.
I heard some kind of stat this past week, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's like thousands upon thousands of new podcasts are launched like every week. I can't remember how many thousands. It was a crazy amount. But most of them, it was a very large percentage, also never make it to the 20th show. And then another percent, a lot of a very high percentage don't make it past 7 or 8 shows. So, like what Evan said, really commit, get a schedule down, know how many you're going to do and know how often, and keep going.
One of the things that I would also add into this discussion is, I too have a lot of people that have reached out to me to ask, how did you do it? How did you get started? What did I do? And, I think a lot of people need to also ask themselves, is there going to be an audience for their podcast? Because it is possible for you to niche way too far down, and you have too specific of a niche that, it's not really going to be beneficial. Now, I say it might not be beneficial, but it depends, because if your goal of the podcast is to reach thousands and thousands of people and get on that new and noteworthy section on iTunes and all that kind of stuff, if you're too far niched down, it's never going to happen. It's not going to happen. But if your goal is to create a podcast, to use that as a reason to reach out to other people that you would not necessarily be able to reach out to, and you're using it as an authority platform within that small niche that you have, then it can be beneficial. But you just have to understand that you don't want to be looking at the stats all the time, because I know all of you probably do the same thing. Maybe your wife does it more, Jason. I'm not sure how much you're looking at the stats, but we look at the stats, right? We're trying to see how many people are actually engaging with our podcast. Maybe people are downloading our podcast, and it motivates us to continue to do more. I think what happens with what Whitney was saying, that when people first start a podcast and they start to look at those stats, they kind of get a little discouraged. And that's right. They get to those 20 episodes, right? Because they look at it and they think it's a waste of time. But each one of these podcasts builds on top of the other. And you have to also start to think about, why are you doing this? Are you doing this to reach the masses, or are you doing this to really reach a certain segment of people that you can reach out to? And I know you guys use this for the same reason, a similar reason that I do, but I like it because I personally have not actually monetized my podcast like I probably should have, but I have learned and have gained so much value from the guests that have been on. And I've learned a lot of things that I've taken and I've actually monetized indirectly because I met somebody through the podcast. But then I also, when I go and network with other people, it's an excuse for me to invite them on and try to continue that networking and that conversation past an event itself. And I know each one of you have probably met somebody at an event and invite them onto your podcast, and it just continues that conversation with that person that you meet when you're networking as well.
Yeah, and Dan, to your point, the way I see a podcast is like, going back to what Trevor said, is rapid of working with investors. and using the rapid method, that I see that like hour or 30 minutes that you do on a podcast, that's building rapport. That's the best kind of rapport you can build with somebody. So that literally is an hour long of rapport that you would not likely get if you were to just call somebody up on the phone.
Especially with some of the high level people that you have had on your podcast, Evan, because I'm not sure how you do, but you got some pretty high level people that you've got on yours.
Yeah, honestly, we could go into that, like how to get some top name people, because that's something that I've literally learned from other people how to do that, and I think it has a lot to do with social media. And there's a guy, Casey Adams, who he's like 18 years old, and he's built this massive multi-million person following. And I just kind of learned from him, like he just tells you, he's like, this is how I've reached out to Grant Cardone, Andy Frisella, Ed Milet, like all these top name people, and he's 18 years old. He's like, I'm literally on Instagram all day. And he said, it's not from a satisfaction point of view, it's from a work point of view. He's like, I'm literally trying to connect with people, create a community. He literally talks about sliding into DMs like every day, like, you know, sending like 20 DMs an hour. Like, it's like methodical, like constantly reaching out, constantly seeing if you can add value, constantly creating an audience. So that way you can bring other people on to share their message, share their journey on your platform. So that's honestly, like, that's something I've told everybody. I'm like, you need to be taking advantage of Instagram, taking advantage of DMs. That's how I've connected with literally like most all of my top level guests.
Wow. Well, now we can all learn something. I know one of the ways I've found most of mine is actually via LinkedIn. So, I mean, maybe let's just kind of change the topic just a little bit and talk about how you've reached some of your guests. Where's the places that you have found most of your guests? So, Evan, you obviously Instagram is your number one resource. I would say for us, LinkedIn for our entrepreneur podcast that I have is the number one resource. And then I also, through going in and going to a lot of multifamily events and networking and stuff like that, I found quite a bit for our multifamily podcast.
Yeah, it's good. You have your core circle that you can always reach out to and you get them going, but it's also great to have referrals. If you have a friend who's also doing a show, you know, you can go in there and just ask them like, hey, listen, you know, you had this guest on there. Would you mind just making an introduction? Because that's better to have that warm introduction come across where you can just say, hey, you know, XYZ just introduced me. They said they had a great time with you on the show. I'd love to just see if you'd be interested in coming on the show. Just as simple as that.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
I think initially it's difficult to get high level people on your show because a lot of people will ask, well, how many downloads do you have? Well, we haven't launched yet, you know, or, you know, and you're telling them things like that. And a lot of people aren't going to be willing to be on your show, but I feel like it's a lot about how you present yourself. And we had some big name people in the industry on the show before we had even launched. And I feel like I spent a lot of time trying to make our presentation to them as professional as possible. And, you know, and to find as many guests as we have to find initially, it was going to other people's podcasts, you know, and finding all these people who are experts in this business. You know, I mean, there's a whole list of people that are wanting to be interviewed again and again and again that's been on other shows, you know, and that takes down that stress or that pressure a little bit while you're getting started. But then also, like Dan has said as well, LinkedIn has been another good place and resource. Then networking events, you know, find people as we're networking. And just like Dan said, you're talking about real estate, you're talking about whatever, you know, in the industry. And then it's like, okay, this person would make a great guest to be on the show and promote them that way.
Yeah, I think there are a couple other things too, right? So obviously tapping into other podcasts, the guests that you're listening to. But I would say anytime you come across somebody who impresses you. So if you're listening to an audiobook or you're reading a book and you enjoy that, why not go ahead and reach out to that individual? If you're reading a blog post that somebody wrote, if you're on social media, like you said, and you love the content, that's a great opportunity to reach out. So a lot of times when, you know, we'll have folks who, you know, were, you know, either are podcasters or invest in multifamily, a lot of the names that we know and recognize. And we certainly do a lot of folks with a lot of interviews with those individuals. But a lot of times I'm also looking for somebody different, right? I want to be the first person to introduce a certain speaker to an audience. So I'm trying to find ways to do that so I can add value. And because our show focuses a little bit more on the marketing side of things, as well as the branding and market research, sometimes we're trying to find folks who are more focused on the research side or more focused on the branding side. So we're going to have to kind of look at using LinkedIn to identify some of those individuals, using different books, podcasts, and other things like that as well.
You know, one other thing I would add, I just recently did this, and I'm now like, I've convinced myself of how great a value it is. and I want to share it with everybody here, is that I'm sure everybody has like a list of people in their head that they would love to have on the podcast, right? And so I decided, I was like, I had kind of an ongoing list, but I wasn't keeping up with it. I wasn't really like tracking it well. And I had a bunch of names that I'd added, but they're just in my head. So I was like, well, let's put this down on paper. Let's actually take action on it. And so I spent way longer than I thought I would, but I ended up spending like a whole Saturday, a couple weekends ago, and just like going through, doing exactly what we're talking about here. Like I went through other people's podcasts. I went through I went through all these different lists, like top CRE, people, all these different magazines, all these different websites. They put out these lists of people. So I just went through these lists of people of like saying, okay, well, these guys are doing amazing work. Like I would love to talk to them, and just going through other people's lists, other people's podcasts, and also going through like the top 200 podcasts, because those are obviously people that want to be promoting their podcasts and people that I would love to talk to. And cross-pollinate with them. So I ended up creating this list of like 300 people. I was like, okay, these are my like dream 300 is what I'm calling it. And it's like, that's what I want to go after. So I've now created this like Google spreadsheet where I have like, have I asked them yet? Have they said yes? Has the interview been completed? Who's the point of contact? Almost like a CRM for my guests. And honestly, like I've only been using it for a few weeks, but it has already gotten me focused in on who I want to get on the podcast, and focused me in on constantly reaching out to those same people. And I have like 10 or 15 people that are at the top of the list that they're like, okay, that's where my attention's going for now. Once I get them, then I'll fill in with another 15.
Who's number 5 after the 4 of us?
Go with Grant Cardone.
There you go.
I was going to say, I guess I'm never going to be invited onto the podcast again because I'm on the 300 list probably.
No, honestly, you guys are all on there. So that's actually something I saw the list of people that were on this panel. I was like, damn, this is great. Like, these are all people I want to have on the podcast. And so Dan's already been on, but I'd love to have everybody else on too, and vice versa.
Well, I'd be glad to make some introductions for you.
Yeah.
So
that is a good point, though. You can look who's actually promoting something or about to go out with a book, because usually they're the ones who want to get out there. So if you see they're going to be out there and doing something, it's a great time to reach out to them, because usually most approaches is just widespread net to reach as many customers as possible if they're dropping a book or something.
Right.
That's a great point. I just want to reiterate that because, one of the challenges I faced when we launched our show was because we were focused on market research. I actually wanted to get like the person in charge of real estate development for McDonald's, right? I wanted the person who decided to move headquarters downtown. I wanted to try to get them on the show. Well, guess what? They have very little reason to want to come on a podcast and talk about their business in an open forum like that. So that was something I kind of learned the hard way, was you kind of need that guest to be interested in coming on and talk about the topic. But brokers absolutely want to talk about it, right? This is where their business lies. They need to tell people about why their market is great and where people are investing. Investors, authors, podcasters, bloggers. So these individuals who have a reason to promote are going to be your most likely guests on the show. So you can have other folks that you want to reach out to, but if they don't have a compelling reason to want to come out and promote what they're doing, it may be more difficult. And I would also say follow up. I just recorded somebody about 2 weeks ago who I had been trying to get on the show for 18 months. I reached out 3 times, nothing. I reached out a few more times, and they were kind of on my just check-in list, right? And I would engage with them via social media. And finally, she came back and said, hey, I know you reached out. I know we talked about doing this. I'm ready now. I was a little nervous to be on the podcast before, but now I'm comfortable. Are you still open to having me as a guest? We just recorded. So you do need to follow up. If you have people you want to have on, make sure you follow up with them. Don't just send them an invitation once and then, disappear. Make sure you kind of keep up and following up with those individuals.
So speaking of the list of people that you want to have on your podcast, do each of you also have a list of people that you will never have back on your podcast?
Ooh.
You're all laughing. And
I'm gonna pretend to take a sip right now.
Yeah.
I actually do have that list. So whenever I do a podcast, it's kind of interesting. I started doing this in the beginning where I had a spreadsheet that I use with my virtual assistant, and it's out of Argentina. And I basically have it on. I think Whitney's seen that spreadsheet before, but on it actually says yes, no. and it doesn't say anything in there but yes, no. And I put onto the side yes or no as to whether or not I would want to invite them back in, so that, you know, when you're doing a daily podcast and even a weekly podcast or whatever, a lot of times you need to like recycle some of your audience to, you know, some of your guests in the past that were really good and solid. And so on there is like a yes, no. And I don't have very many no's, but there are a few of them on there that, you know, are no's. So, I mean, I do have that list if you want to talk about that. Do you guys have any shows that you have done that you decided not to release because it was so bad?
Yes.
I've actually had two of those.
I've had what was that, Dan?
I was just going to say, I've actually had two of them.
Yeah, I've had just one. It was just a conversation that I realized afterward. I was like, that just doesn't resonate with our audience. And, you know, you just bite the bullet and say, just move on.
Yeah, the guest that I had that I didn't release there was two of them. One of them was a guy that sounded like he was smoking pot while he was on the podcast. Like literally, he's like, yeah, it's pretty cool. You know, I was just like, what? And then like had another guest that I had on, and every question that I asked him, it was like, let's just table that one and come back to it. And I went to the next question. I got to like the fourth question. I'm like, well, that was the meat of the podcast. I'm not sure. I gave him the questions ahead of time. He just didn't answer. I was just like, okay, well, I guess that's great. What do you want to talk about? So, but I guess it doesn't happen very often. But when you're doing a daily one, I think it happens a little bit more too.
Yeah,
sure. I think the other thing that happens too is we had one episode that we were hesitant on releasing. We did release it. Content was phenomenal. The problem was the audio quality. Mm-hmm. You know, we have a web-based system that we use to record, and for whatever reason, the guests, you know, they only had their phone, so we recorded them via their phone, and the quality was terrible, but the content was so good. And the reality was, I ran out of recorded episodes. So instead of being able to re-record this guest, I kind of ran out of, this was very early on, I ran out of the recorded episodes I had. And I needed to get an episode out on Tuesday. So it was either miss a week, which I felt would have been a really bad idea, or release that episode. So again, the content was phenomenal. Loved them. And I actually tried to re-record them to get better quality content. But the audio quality was not up to par, not to our standards.
I guess a beware for people who are thinking about starting a podcast is that, like, if you're hearing this and you're like, well, I might not want to release it because I just might not be good doing this. Well, if you've never, done this in school or never interviewed people, you're not going to be good to start. I mean, that's just the bare of the bone. You're not going to be the best interviewer out there. You're not going to come out there and just do this magnificent, 60 minutes interview, but you just got to get them out there and get going, because you're ultimately going to find you're going to find to get going. So if your fear is, I'll just record these and like everyone you don't like, well, ultimately you just got to get it out there and put yourself out there on a ledge, and you ultimately become better. We call our early ones the dark days. And if you listen to some people, some people have had podcasts throughout, you go back and some of these like really great people are like out, they didn't have a huge budget to start. And so when they got started, if you go back to some of those other ones, they're not the greatest, but they're out there and it got them started.
Yeah. To Jason's point, it's funny. If you go back into like any like big name person, like for example, I went back and looked at Lewis Howes's first videos, and they're literally they're like, his learning stages. And it was the same way for me when I was getting started with Monumental. It was like, I was telling my dad just a minute ago, I was like, when I first started the podcast, I was like nervous out of my mind for the whole day, because I was like, oh man, like I don't want to screw this up. This guy's a big name. Like, this is my first interview. I don't know how to interview. What am I going to do? Like, what if I screw up? What if I say something stupid? Like, all these things are running through your head, and you're like, well, you just have to remember to, take that step forward and take action and put yourself out there, because you're not going to be good day one. But it takes practice, and over time, like now I'm very comfortable in it, and as are everybody else in this panel. Like it comes a lot more naturally, but you learn as you progress.
It's not going to be that way initially, is it, guys? I mean, and you just have to get started and understand that the 20th show is going to be a lot better than the first show, and the 50th show is going to be even better, and the 100th. But you got to get started, or you're never going to get to the 20th show. So it's just not going to happen. And something else, one of you said reminded me of a good topic, is like how to prepare a guest, and I've worked on that a little bit recently. But anyway, it's up to you, Dan.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's dive into that. That was Jeff's question about, do you have a checklist of things to send over to a person you are inviting on a podcast in regards to making sure all their tech and equipment is working and up to par? Or do you find that the caliber of people you invite are typically, or do they typically have that all under control?
I would say a lot of people don't have the audio and the tech stuff under control. However, they're experts in this field, or, in their field, and I want to have them on the show. And so I want to help prepare them. And when, as Dan knows this too, but like if I'm doing numerous shows back to back to back to back all day, I can't spend 10 minutes with somebody helping them get their mic set up. And so I just not too long ago, I created, maybe a couple months ago, I created a video. It's like, I try to make it as short as possible so people will actually watch it. As short as possible, telling them exactly how to be prepared for the show, what I need from them, try to make it as simple as possible, but this is what I need you to do. And just some common issues, like they get on and they're, I can't hear them, but they got to click the connect to computer audio, just telling them some things like that. So if they've never used Zoom before, they've never been on a podcast before, they know right away to go down there and do that. They understand the importance of me getting their bio and, or my assistant getting their bio, getting those things ahead of time. We've had this sheet that we send them. We call it a guest guide, tells them everything they need to know, but as busy as we all are, we know most people don't read those, right? But if I tell them, okay, here's a 2-minute video telling you everything you need to know, a lot of people will watch it because they want to be somewhat prepared. They want it to be a good show, and I feel like that has helped prepare my guests a lot more than just sending them a document. We still do that. It lays out exactly everything they need to know, and even some potential questions that we could talk about. But more than anything is that the videos helped a lot, I think. And so that now when it's time to go, their audio's ready, their mic's ready, they're set up, they understand they might need to check their lighting beforehand, just some simple things like that if they're not used to being recorded.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Whitney. I mean, that's pretty much it. The video is a great idea, right? Because I'd probably watch your video more than I'm going to read something through just to go through it. But ultimately, most people, it's not their first podcast, but generally, audio is so good today. People are using all different kinds of things. Sometimes it just really comes down to as long as they're in to confined room and they don't have wind or other gusts coming around. That's usually some of the parts that take the sound out of whack, or having my bulldogs in the other room going nuts. one of those two.
Yeah,
I will say. Oh, go ahead, Evan.
The only other thing I would say is just the internet connection is very important when you're doing Zoom calls or Skype calls, because that's been the only major issue I've had with guests is that they'll have some very poor internet, and then we'll get started and then it'll slag, and then we'll have to restart, and it just ends up being a lot more editing, and then sometimes the guest can get frustrated. So definitely try to forewarn them or ask them if they can make sure they have good internet.
I think one other thing on that is making sure the content that they're prepped for it. One of the things with our show is we are looking to give certain tips or information about either a market, how to research a market, how to find the best place to invest, or marketing tips, branding tips, how to build an email list, things like that. And sometimes guests want to come on and just tell their story. And our show really isn't formatted. We'll do a little bit of time on that, but we really don't have a whole lot of time for people just to kind of share their story. So making sure you're clear on, hey, if there are things that you want to highlight, let me know what those things are and let me bring them up as a host of the show, as opposed to me asking you a question and you kind of, pivoting to whatever your talk points are. So really just understanding, how do we make this a win-win situation, not just for you and I, but for our listeners? Because ultimately that's what we're doing this for, is to give them great value. We need to make sure we understand what we're trying to get across to them, and I can help them with that up front.
I'll say one thing before I record any show now, and I learned this from experience of being interviewed on another show, and I felt like there was no prep whatsoever. We were actually communicating as I met him at a conference, and we were just having a call, and then he's like, well, why don't we record a podcast? And I said, well, okay. And he said, well, let's do it right now. And I said, well, I've got 10 minutes till I have another call. And he said, no, that's fine. Let's just do it. I said, okay, let's do it. And so there was absolutely no prep whatsoever. And it didn't do me any favors. I'll just say that. And so I learned that, now before every show, I ask the guests, what is your focus in the industry? Like, I know most of us are part of a bigger team, right? And people see, you're buying these buildings, but your focus may be underwriting, your focus may be marketing, your focus may be something else. And I want to focus on what you're an expert in. So I bring better content to the listeners, and I promote you as the expert that you are. And so I'm not asking you questions way over here about something that's real, not your focus in the industry.
So I want to pose a different question here now to kind of change it a little bit. And I wanted you guys to go around and discuss how your podcast has helped you in your real estate endeavors. And then at the same time, I want you to also answer the question of, what makes your podcast unique when you compare it to other real estate related podcasts.
I can jump in there. So, the show's helped me in a couple different ways. I think the most direct answer I can give you is I have done real estate deals with 2 of the first 7 guests I had on the show. So just from a relationship standpoint, obviously we're reaching out to folks in those early episodes, people we know, but that podcast allowed us to really forge a deeper relationship and talk more about what's happening in the business. So that's one thing that has come from it. The other piece of it is really gaining some visibility. It's about creating your own credibility, getting comfortable with the information that you have, and being able to share and provide value back to others. And that has allowed us to really grow our audience, grow our connections, grow our investor database, but more importantly, just really build the influence that we have. We can talk to pretty much anybody in the industry, reach out, have a conversation with them, and find ways to extract that information and provide that to our listeners, to our guests. So that, thought leadership platform has allowed us to really grow and expand, to get us comfortable to launch our own podcast, to get us comfortable to launch our own conference, our own meetups and things of that nature. So really being able to take advantage of those connections and build our relationships. There was a second part of the question too, right? What was the second part?
What makes your podcast unique?
So our show is a little different. There are a lot of multifamily shows or apartment shows. I think one thing we wanted to focus more on was the marketing. My background is in marketing. I've done that for large corporations throughout my career. So we wanted to focus and hone in more on market research as well as the marketing aspect. So that's really what makes our show a little bit different. So especially for anybody looking to invest either passively or be on the active side when it comes to multifamily, it highlights some of the marketing aspects of what you need.
Yeah, I love that. Honestly, you're working on building out your brand, right? And ultimately it becomes a virtual business card, because you don't know how many people you reach when you're going out there doing this podcast. And it gives you a side of credibility, because now you're bringing on, of course, industry performers who are doing great things. And now you're having access to them. So it allows you really just to build out and formulate your brand. And that goes to a far reach, because you really can just send people back to show you what you're doing just through just the reach of your podcast. And then for ours, just really, we focus on just a roadmap to wealth, health, and success through real estate. And ultimately, there's so many avenues you can get there with real estate, but you have to make sure that there's so many different sides of you that's also there, from your family to your fitness to your financial. And we really hone in having different days targeted to that, because, I do it with my wife. It's this awesome thing we do together. And that's a really reach we want to talk to people, is that if you're not having this common through line with everyone around you and even your body in part, ultimately, even if you reach your success in real estate, are you well-rounded, and is that fulfilling you?
A big way of podcasting has helped me in so many ways. It's taught me so much about this industry, but the networking component has been amazing, of just getting to meet people face to face that you would normally never get to introduce yourself to. You would have no reason to. They would have no reason to talk to you. If you're brand new in the industry, that a lot of guys, obviously they don't know who you are. They don't have the time to just talk to everybody who wants to talk to them. But if you're promoting them on your show, it gives a reason for you to connect with them. And I mean, it's allowed me to know most of the presenters in this summit, before the summit, especially everybody on this panel, but almost probably every speaker, I've either had on the show or I've got to know a little bit personally. And that's been a big way the podcast has helped. But it also allows me to add value to so many other people, introduce myself to so many people, through the show. But one way we're unique, obviously, is doing it daily, but then we're focused on syndication.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing that I've gained from the podcasting, just kind of like overarching, has just been confidence. Because I feel like that resonates in everything else that you're doing. And that confidence comes from everything that we've talked about up to this point, of learning, of putting yourself out there, of like reaching out to people, of connecting with people, of learning, and sharing what you're learning with others. I feel like my confidence has grown like by leaps and bounds since I've hosted Monumental and been able to learn so much from my guests. I'd say that would be like the overarching thing that I've gained. And that obviously plays in hugely to my real estate business. But the other things I would say would be, I think Jason mentioned it, like first impressions are huge. Like I literally have, investors or bankers or city leaders that I'll meet with, and then, I'll get to know them, and then they don't know I have a podcast. And then all of a sudden they look me up. They're like, "Oh, you have a podcast. Like, that's so cool." And it just like, it creates another dynamic to my personality and what I can offer to people. And people find podcasting really cool. So they think it's like amazing that I have a podcast, and I'm sure that's happened to you guys too. It's like, it just adds another dynamic, and it helps with that first impression or that second impression, or enhances how they perceive you. And that goes tremendously toward being able to continue to work with people, them wanting to continue to work with you. And yeah, I love what you said about virtual business card. That's exactly right. Like that is what it, like people look me up to see if they want to do work with me. And then they see I have a podcast, and then they start listening to it. Like last night I had some friends that didn't know I had a podcast. And then all of a sudden they're like, "Oh my God, that's so cool." Like they're asking all these questions about it, and it just builds credibility. And it also gives me confidence to continue doing it and continue impacting more people. And as far as what we do on Monumental, so really we like to help tell the stories of entrepreneurs and real estate investors and real estate developers, and really looking at how our guests and how our listeners can use real estate as a vehicle for change and a vehicle for making massive monumental things happen in the world.
And I'll kind of, tie it up here with mine. So I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier about what I've done with mine, as far as I haven't really monetized it or anything like that. What it has really helped me to do is like everybody else has mentioned, increasing that network and building a network with a lot of people, continuing those conversations, but also from the content that the guest provides, I've learned a lot as well. The Multifamily Investor Nation Summit today, this is our second summit that we've done, but the whole idea I got from a podcast guest. And I just started diving deep into that podcast guest a little bit more. And oddly enough, that podcast guest is actually speaking right now in room 2, Scott Carson. So Scott Carson was the one that he actually does one for the note buying business. So I got the idea from him, and that's how the summit really got started. And so I think for me, it's really helped out from a standpoint of just learning from other guests and learning more about what they are doing right now, and how I can maybe think outside of my own industry of how I can actually do things as well. And so as far as my podcast, I have 2 of them. So I have the Entrepreneur Podcast, where the whole kind of thing that makes that different is that we dive deep into tough decisions that people have made. So we talk about tough decisions for entrepreneurs. That's the name of it. It's called Tough Decisions for Entrepreneurs. And we go and dive deep into 2 tough decisions that they made. One that was a tough decision in business that they made that had a really bad outcome, and all the lessons they learned through that, because we learn a lot of lessons through those bad decisions. And then the second thing is one that had a really good and positive outcome in some of those lessons. And then the second podcast, I really was trying to scratch my head a little bit about how to make it different, because I think a lot of people, before they start a podcast, they go and research what other podcasts are out there. And there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of real estate related podcasts as well. So how do you stand out? How do you stand out from the crowd? And one of the things that I did with mine is it's the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast, is we only interview guests that have closed deals in the last 12 months. So it's a little bit harder for me to find guests, because I got to find people who are actually closing deals, right? I get people every day that reach out to me and they're like, "Hey, I want to be a guest on your show." And I'm like, "Have you closed a deal in the last 12 months?" And they're like, "No, I wanted to talk about, this, and this." And I'm like, "Well, that's not this podcast, right?" It's got to be very specific. And I know, even with Whitney, yours is a little bit different like that too. And same thing with John, it's very specific. Like, you don't really just want somebody coming on there and talking about, how good they are and how they have a brokerage firm or an insurance or something like they want to promote, or a book that they're launching. It's really specific to the topic. And it's nice because you can really hone in who you're looking for, but sometimes it also makes it a little more challenging to find that person. So that's kind of a little bit about my podcast and what it's done for me as well. The next question I want to pose here is about virtual assistants. So how many of you use virtual assistants? And if you do, what do those virtual assistants do for your podcast?
Yeah. Starting doing a daily show, I knew from the beginning that I was not going to be able to do everything. It was not possible to get everything done by myself. So right off the bat, I knew that I was going to have to build a team. And so I found at the time about 5 VAs. There were 4 that were doing something almost every day for the show. And so everybody had different jobs, different tasks, and I had a big Excel sheet, and it I laid out everybody's tasks and what they had to do. And like I said, everybody did something different. Everybody could watch that sheet. It was a shared Google Drive. And so everybody knew where they was at. My main assistant, she really helped me watch, make sure everybody was staying up, where they needed to be, and help me monitor that and track and make sure that we were on task. But whether it was audio, whether it was show notes, whether it was video, posting social media, somebody had different tasks, and finding them is not always easy. But I've used VA agencies, but I've used Upwork more than anything to find good VAs.
Hey, Whitney, quick question. What are the different tasks? You mentioned a few. What are all the tasks that they do?
Yeah. So, one guy was doing audio editing. Another guy was doing like show notes, and he might help me title the shows and things like that. Somebody else was editing video and doing social media posts. Somebody else was more of a helping me manage it. And she was more like an assistant doing lots of things for me. But one of the big things, another big task is finding people for the show. Obviously, if I'm interviewing more than 30 people a month, we have to send lots of emails out, inviting lots of people to get that many guests. Yeah. And so she's managing my calendar. She is, making sure those days are full. So like if I have a big recording day, I want to make sure that it's as full as I can possibly get it, or numerous days a week, or however, I'm recording that week. But that's just another very important task. It's pretty time consuming, is making sure we get enough guests.
Yeah, I'll take it next. We have a similar format as what Whitney was saying. So we have one person. She kind of is the overarching, helps behind the scenes, helps coordinate everything. And then we have another person that also does all the transcribing. I usually come up with the titles. And then we have another person that does the audio and video editing. And then I typically post on social media, but that's something that I want to start getting help with, because it is time consuming.
So it takes time to find the right one, and you want to make sure that you're being very specific with what you expect from them, because they're not going to, most notably when you're putting out there, they're not going to go past what you basically outlined for them. So we have an outline of what we expect them to do in terms of, editing videos, editing the podcast, how it's put together, different formats and platforms they're going to use, and then where they're going to post it, what times they're going to post it, what days they're going to post it, etc. We do still in-house, our assistant does still do the titles and the write-ups for the podcast, but past that, all the other parts from editing, posting, is handled by a VA.
So we've gone through multiple VAs and partners on our show. We started when we launched. We had an editor, and then we also had someone who did the show notes, and and I was basically running the social media and kind of posting it. Where we're at now is we have the same. Someone does all the video edits. I actually will write the show notes, and then someone helps me with SEO. So when we're looking at headlines, I may come up with a headline that sounds snappy, but what I've realized is sometimes that doesn't work well for SEO. So it's kind of a balance of, is this a snappy title that someone's going to click and hit play? Or is this something that's going to resonate well from an SEO standpoint and allow this to be found from the blog? So sometimes it's not the same. So we're always playing back and forth with that. We'll throw out a couple names and run some tests there and see. But we do work with our VAs on that. What I found was it was fairly easy to record all the episodes and even get them edited and out. But we started to slack on our promotion of those episodes. So we did bring in a VA who really focuses on helping us create graphic images, things like that, to really push and seed, get it out on LinkedIn, getting it out on Facebook. And for us, because those social media platforms have different algorithms, and a lot of times they don't like it when you're driving people away from that platform, we've had to find ways to create content that engages people on that platform while still encouraging them to check out the actual episode. So that's still something we're toying around with, but definitely make sure we have a VA who can help us create that content and give us some flexibility in what we push out.
I actually use VAs as well. I have for my podcast, I have one that does both of my podcasts, and I basically go in and record the podcast. He has access to my Zoom account because that's usually where I record them. He'll go in there, take them off, do the editing on them, the video as well as the audio. And then he also works with a show notes editor to get the show notes done. So I guess we have a sub VA, I guess, if you will, that works for him. And then he actually is the one that goes in there and launches in all of our social media and all that kind of stuff, and does all the promotionals and stuff like that. So I think all of us would agree that it's very hard to do all this without some form of virtual assistant or assistant of some sort, because it's hard to do it all. So like for the first month, I did it all myself because I wanted to know how to do it. And I wanted to feel like if something happened to the VA, I could step in and do it. But at this point, I would never want to go back and actually do it. So it's very good to have those people along the sides, and they're very easy to find. I mean, like all of us have mentioned about, it might have taken you a little few people to go through when you're finding a VA to find that right person. But usually you can find somebody that's willing to work and actually show up and actually perform the work the way you want it to be done. And the nice thing about a VA is that if they're not working, they're virtual, so you can fire them and hire another one fairly quickly and get them up to par. And I think going with what Whitney said about training the guests that are coming on, you can also create these videos to train new VAs that are coming online. So you don't have to sit there and, when you hire a new one, go through a whole nother training process with them. You sit down one time and train them on what you want that VA to do. And you just give them your videos and say, watch these videos and do it. And if they can, most of them should be able to perform from those videos if they're good and they're detailed enough. And that way you're not having to sit there and train, 15 different times before you find that good VA. And hopefully it won't take you 15 times. But I'm just saying, if you do have to go through that process, it's a lot easier when you have that video training already done.
I will say that VAs, you have to be careful in what you give them, though, because a lot of times, there's a lot of stuff and you try to hire somebody to do it. And VAs are great, but they're really great at very specific tasks. If you try to get someone who can edit the show, do the show notes, and do promotion and understand SEO, while they're somewhat correlated and related, a lot of times there's not someone who can be great at that. So just make sure if you're looking at the role, be very clear. If you're looking at someone who can write, then have that person do the show notes, but don't ask them to do all the other things. Don't expect them to be a social media maven. So just making sure that when you are bringing on people, you're giving them the right roles and tasks that they can be successful and help you be successful.
I would add your job description, like if you're using something like Upwork, is very important how you do that. And you can even upload, let's say, an audio file and say, as part of their resume, they need to edit that file for you, and that be part of it. What that's going to do is save you a lot of time, because the people that don't really care about the position aren't going to do it, but the few that do, are showing you they're going above and beyond to do that. And I also, by building that team, it helped me to commit to the podcast. Like, somebody else is doing these tasks. And what helped also is that I had almost 60 shows recorded before we launched. And so,
wow.
that helped. I was committed, right? I mean, I already done that many shows, but also that allowed me to have that buffer. So when my team messes up, when it happens, we've got plenty of time to correct it, and get things back in order. And so, it wasn't like, a week at a time, even, when I'm trying to get these people from all over the world, they may not even speak really great English, to do these tasks that they're good at, but things are going to happen. And so I wanted to be way ahead.
Let's pivot here and start to talk about some of the resources that we use for our podcast. In addition, obviously, to our VAs, we mentioned Upwork.com. Some people have used Fiverr before and stuff like that, but we use Upwork.com for our VAs. But as far as the platform, what platform do you use when you are recording your podcast? And also, are you guys doing video as well as audio, or just one, or just the audio?
So I record on Zoom for all of our over the internet, and we do audio and video, and starting to get into more of in-person interviews as well. So that's all new to me too. Thankfully, my girlfriend knows all about video and recording, but yeah, we're starting to do more in person as well.
I use Zoom for every show. It's worked out really well for us. All of it's automated, so the guest gets the link as soon as they book and all that stuff. And then, but I also use Audacity to record my audio. And so I hit record, or as soon as I open Zoom, I hit record on Audacity at the same time. And then I upload that file so my VAs can use that audio as opposed to my Zoom audio, just because it's better quality. And so then it's recording directly on my computer instead of recording, on the internet through Zoom.
Yeah, we use Zoom as well. So we do video and audio, and I feel that's important because ultimately you're going to just think about who you're reaching. Because just because you're doing audio doesn't mean everybody's just going to be listening to podcasts. A lot of people, Gary Vaynerchuk had a great thing. He's like, you got to think about like the different channels of TV. Like you have ABC, NBC, CBS, ESPN, Fox. Well, some people are just aligned to like one channel. So if you just put yourself out there on one channel, you're going to miss all the other people that aren't out there on the other channel. So if you're on Instagram, well, then you need to be marketing to Facebook because you have different people, and you want to put different videos out for Facebook and then YouTube, because you're ultimately going to be reaching different people that aren't jumping across platforms just to watch you on different points. And that goes to when you're putting out there for hosting, you're on Google Play, you're on Stitcher, you're on, the multiple other ones that are coming out, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and just have that reach because different people are just listening to you on different platforms.
So I'm probably the oddball here. I do use Zoom, but I primarily use something called Cast. And the reason I like Cast is it actually records the lines individually. Whitney mentioned that he records on Zoom, but then uses Audacity for his own audio file. Cast actually records each line separately. And I really like that. And it also is in the cloud. So every 10 seconds, it's automatically basically capturing. So if we were to get disconnected, we can pretty much start at the same spot. I can just wait for you to get back on, and we can still record and have one file versus having to splice together multiple files. So I do like that platform. We only do audio right now. We are getting ready to transition to incorporate video as well. One of the things that I want to do with video is find ways to make it unique and compelling. So that's something that we're toying with, is how can we do video, but do it in a little bit of a unique way than kind of what everyone else is doing right now. But we do like audio a lot.
What kind of equipment are you guys using as far as like, the camera, the webcam or microphone or anything like that? What kind of quality do you think people should be shooting for?
Yeah, I actually, I just posted an article that talked about all the equipment in preparation for this. I knew we'd go through it. So, but my mic is, it's the Audio Technica AR2100. I actually tested a lot of mics, some mics yep, there you go. And I'm not using it today because it's packed up somewhere. So I'll have it tomorrow when I load these boxes. But it's a great mic. It's pretty inexpensive in the realm of things. It's not very expensive. And I've bought mics that are twice as much, and I've been very disappointed with the quality. I had a Yeti mic and some other mics, and the settings are a bit complex, depending on the room. They can pick up different background noises and things like that. And the Audio Technica is just a very simple mic. And I really like that as well. I used to have like the big production headphones that I would use. And I realized that they really weren't necessary. I mean, it's not like we are making music. So I really just need to hear my guest. And that was sufficient. So I don't think you need crazy production headphones.
I'm going to post a link here as well to that microphone, because I know several of us are using that microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, for like $90, you can get the mic, the stand, and maybe a pop filter too on Amazon.
So
Go ahead.
I don't know if I'm the only one, but I have a Blue Yeti.
I got that one too.
What I've seen a lot of people is like the entry level mic. I think it's like $120 or something, but it's worked out really well for me. And then also when we do in-person interviews, we have a Rode mic that mounts on top of the camera. And then we also have lavalier mics. We got them all on Amazon. And then we have like I'm trying to look at the name. I think it's a Logi. It's a 1080p webcam. It just mounts on top. It's USB. I think it was like $30 on Amazon. So it's not too expensive to get into podcasting.
I'm posting a link to that as well on here too. That's the one I use.
Yeah, Logitech. Yeah, mine's a 1080p as well.
Anybody else using anything different than that?
I think we're all following the Tim Ferriss thing that we all read. So I said, don't break the box, man. You don't need to be crazy and just go out there and do this crazy stuff. It just get started, get out there and make it happen. Don't go on this point of having all this high-tech stuff and you realize you don't know what the heck you're doing.
The more complicated that somebody makes it, the less likelihood they will continue doing it.
Agreed.
easier you can make it. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have a very busy schedule, and sometimes I'm doing podcasts while I'm driving down the road. And I'm not the one driving. I'm like riding in the back, but I might be riding in the back seat. And you guys have seen some of my videos before. I mean, just one of my promos for the Multifamily Investor Nation Summit I was doing while I was sitting on the beach with the family. You know, I had one scheduled, and I was like, well, I want to go to the beach. So I went to the beach and I just pulled it up on the beach, you know. So
That's awesome.
I, of course, didn't bring my Logitech webcam and my, nice microphone, but I pulled my laptop up and just did it straight from there. So, just the biggest thing is get it done and realize that version 1 is always better than version none.
I like that. Yeah, I think I've seen you recording going through a drive-through, Dan.
Yeah.
But I'm in a hotel right now. I travel quite a bit for work and different things. And so I have to be able to record whether I'm in a hotel or wherever I'm at. So yeah, make it simple. And really unless you have a mixer or something like that, you can only record so good of audio through a USB port. So you can buy a $500 mic, but guess what? You're still going to get, it's only going to be so good.
You both brought up a good point is like, I think with podcasting, it's good to be versatile, like, have the mindset of like, sometimes you're going to have to do it on the road. Sometimes you're going to have to do it in your dad's house, in your brother's bedroom. Like I literally have like a couple books stacked up below the laptop right now to bring it up high enough so it actually looks at my face. So it's just, it's just part of podcasting, and it's part of the fun.
Mm-hmm.
So let's also talk about, since we're kind of talking about this piece of it, is some of the logistics of things. How many podcasts do you guys record in one day? And then, because I'm assuming we all probably do the same thing as far as like batch recording, where you pick one day a week or one day a month or whatever, and you batch record all your episodes. So how many do you record in one day, and how often do you record each month?
So I just started batching. Changer. I'm 100% sold on batching. So I typically do, depends on the day, but 6 to 8 interviews in a day if we can get them all lined up. But occasionally you'll have top level guests that you will change your schedule in order to get them on. They're big enough where you're like, look, I'll bend over backwards to get a time slot on your calendar.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, we're the same thing. So we're always trying to get ahead of it. And we do 2 days a week. And I generally do 2, maybe max 3. I just find that there's too much else in my day that I did commit to a whole day. It's just not feasible. So I'll do 2 to 3, but it's always just getting ahead. And one of the ways that you can stay and actually accomplish is just like Whitney did. If you're not doing a daily podcast, maybe you don't have to do 60, but you get yourself 10 out there. You got 10 weeks ahead. It gives you 2.5 months to be able to get it out there. Like right now we're out. We're leaving Monday to go see Peely's family. So we have all of July done for our 3-day podcast, and our long form podcast, which are on Wednesday, we have taped out until middle of October. So we're way ahead of it. I don't have to feel the stress of, I have to get something out and putting something out that's subpar. You have time, put it out there, and now just, have it all planned out, and then you can continue to grow it as you move forward.
So we're actually transitioning to batching as well. Prior to that, we basically had a setup where we only went once a day, really. And now we're going to start batching where we have that more frequently, because it's important for us to kind of change our schedule up. And we're going to be putting out more episodes. So we really need to really structure our time a little bit differently.
I think you have to batch. And I think batching helped me to get better at interviewing faster. And doing enough shows and interviews too. So I think the first day that I recorded shows, I did 3 shows. The next day, I think I did 5, and then I did 8, I think the next day. And then from there on, every long day of recording, I've tried to do at least 12 to 15 shows in one day. And they are back to back to back, and they have to be, but it's helped me to get better at interviewing. And so it's why I have to create systems too. So, all these guests are on time. Everybody knows what they need. And so I'll have a couple days a month where I'm recording 12 to 15 shows in a day. And usually that day I'll be interviewed on a couple shows as well after that. And then I'll have a couple days a week where I'll do, 3 or 4 more shows a day, something like that.
Whitney, do you have breaks in between those, or how much time do you give as far as the buffer or breaks between those episodes?
So good question. And so I allow about 40 minutes, and the interview is about 30 minutes. So it allows 10 minutes for me to, get the guests prepared, and if they need some help or whatever. But I also want that time to be able to ask the guest, how can I add value to you? What do you need? Or just to connect. I mean, it's a very important time of your show. If you're batching, I was, leave a few minutes so you can get to know that guest. Even if it's 5 minutes, leave a little time just to talk a little bit. Some guests are just really quick to get off, and others, want to talk to you a little bit and ask you questions, or things like that. And it's a very important time. But so every 40 minutes, all day, there's a new show, and there's no other breaks. It's just back to back to back from, 7 a.m. till 5 or 7 p.m., something like that.
I so wanted you to say that you do everyone in 39 minutes and you have a 1 minute break and jump into the next one. That's what I wanted to hear, but I didn't get it. But I'm going to think you do it in 39 minutes with a 1 minute break.
So, Whitney, are you planning on doing the daily forever, or is there going to be a certain point in time where you're going to transition away from daily?
It's a good question. I plan to keep doing daily for now. We'll see. Maybe in a couple of years, I don't know. I hope to keep doing daily as far as I can see.
Yeah, JLD did it daily for, I think, probably like 4 or 5 years. And just last year, he started going to a bi-weekly or a twice-a-week podcast. So it can be done. And if you look at his website, he always has, his income statements that are on there. They have not gone down since he did that twice a week either. So, but definitely definitely has that following that he could do that as well.
Is it true he charges like $5,000 to be a guest on his show?
Mm-hmm. He does. Yep. Okay. Thank you for not charging me, Whitney. All right. So what are your thoughts on having a podcast cover many different topics? This is a question from Alex, and more so marrying personal topics as well as a deep dive into real estate. Do you think that would be a good idea or maybe not so good?
I think there's a couple different ways you can look at it. I think it's important to be focused, and so your listeners know what to expect, and so that they come to your podcast because they want to learn about something specifically, possibly, but also I would say also doing so many shows, we're focused on syndication, but I've had people on that have other skills outside. It seems like it's outside of real estate. They're not real estate investors. However, they may be really good at marketing or really good at websites or, things like that us in the real estate industry or, especially podcasters as well, that we need those skills or we need to understand these things. And so they provide value to us, even though they're not a syndicator. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely agree. That's something I think we focus in on Monumental. We focus in on multifamily investing and real estate investing. But really, I just love to get into people's story and their background and how they got to where they are today. Because I feel like that tells you a lot of it. If you can kind of go through their story, it really helps people connect with the guest. And also sometimes we'll cover topics of what we'll cover different things about the family life, certain habits that they do on their personal life that can also impact their business and their family life. And so I think it is good to have that well-rounded approach. I think that's something you can definitely do on a podcast.
It comes back to the goal, right? So what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want people to take away? Is it getting to know you, getting to know the guests, getting to know the skills? I think you can absolutely do that, because if it's about getting to know you, then yes, they want to get to know more than just the multifamily investing side. They want to know about, your family and other things that you're doing, the health and those other elements. I think that's part of it. And, it's easy to launch a show and kind of get swayed in the direction you want to take it, especially if you have different guests or different guests reach out. And, sometimes you have to look at it and say, okay, is this guest, is this topic, is this information the right fit for our audience and where we want to take the show? Or do we really need to kind of keep it focused on something else? So I think it really comes down to being clear on what you want the show to be about. And you can evolve too. I mean, you don't have to come in day one, this is it, we're never talking about anything else. You can evolve it, but if you evolve it, it needs to be logical, kind of like Whitney said. It may not be specific to syndication, but it may be a skill or some sort of information that people who are involved in syndication should want to know. I mean, Whitney, you had a guest that I heard her on your show and then reached out to get her on my show. And she was a PR professional, and she was talking about how to get PR for yourself. And again, not explicitly about syndication, but as we talked about marketing and building a brand, I thought it was a great fit for us in our show, right? So there's always times where you can certainly evolve and pivot based on that information.
That's great. Let's pivot here a little bit, and I have 4 minutes left for this panel. So I'm gonna select a few people as I'm going through here. I only have 3 questions I think left here, but I'll just select you so we can kind of go through some of these questions real quick. I'll pick out Evan here. So do you have any systems that you use to formulate engaging questions to ask your guests?
The biggest thing I do is literally just try to do as much research on that person as I can. If they have a book, I try to read the book ahead of the interview. It's a little time consuming and it's a little bit of a commitment, but I feel like I gain a lot from it, and I'm learning as I'm researching, and it just better prepares me to understand their point of view and their model of the world, so that I can really like kind of get into their shoes and be like, okay, well, what are things that they're passionate about? I typically try to think about what are they passionate about? Do they have specific stories that I think would really resonate? And things where they, maybe messed up or certain kind of like tipping points for them. So I think it's always thinking back to your audience. What would they benefit from? And then also like usually all the time, it's people that I'm genuinely curious about. So I just do a ton of homework on them and make sure I know them inside and out, so that way I can ask the best questions.
Yeah, I find that one of the best things here is that I have a list of questions. I'll give it to the guests. I'll ask them when we come on, is there anything you want to focus on or not want to focus on or stay away from? But ultimately, that list of questions, I say, a list of questions, we may stick to it, we may not. And generally, I'll have 20% of the time. And if you want to be a great interviewer, the key to this is just honestly listen to what people say.
Yeah.
It's really the biggest thing. Be respectful of their time, but listen to what they say. I hear people, interview people, but you could hear they're not actually listening to what people are saying. But if you want to have great questions, well, listen to what actually is coming from them, because it just is a wealth of things for you to ask back.
I would agree. A lot of times you can definitely tell when you're listening to somebody else if they're actually paying attention. And, I'm guilty of that myself at certain points of time. I mean, you do enough episodes, you do get a little distracted. But one of the things I try to do is close everything down on my computer, just have that video up with them where I'm focused on just them. I don't get distracted. And I also, if you've ever seen my videos on the Multifamily Investor Nation podcast, I usually have a notebook in front of me and I'm actually handwriting notes just to keep myself focused, and I'm jotting down things and, making sure that I give myself ticklers because as they're talking, I'm thinking of questions and I want to write those little, things down so I can remember those questions, because usually I'll come up with another question while they're talking again as well. So that's great.
I second that, Dan, in a big way. That was a game changer for me. At first, I thought, there's no way I can take notes right now because I'm just learning how to do this and getting started interviewing. But as soon as I started taking notes, it was so much easier, because you do think of that question. I write it down, and the guest talks for a couple more minutes while I think of another question. And if I don't write it down, I can't remember the first question.
Yeah.
So then I'm trying to scramble to find something else. So taking notes at the same time has been really good.
So as we're down to the last minute here, I know we didn't have a lot of time, enough time to answer the rest of the questions that we have here, but take those questions to the mfiinform.com site as well as to the closed Facebook group, and we'll be out there and answering some of those questions. Feel free to tag any one of us and we can answer any of your questions that you have. Before we close it out here, would each of you, starting with Evan in the same order before, Evan, Whitney, John, and Jason, just go through and tell people how to find your podcast. I don't know how to find it. What's the name of it? Because we always know you can go to iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, all the major ones. But say the name of your podcast again so they can know where to get it.
Real quick, before I say the name. So I know Dan just sent out an email for Whitney's fundraiser. So if everybody could try to donate to that, I'm going to donate to that as soon as we get off here. So I just wanted to put a little plug for Whitney and Dan there. So my podcast is monumental. You can find it at evanholladay.com, or probably the best way to find it is if you're on Instagram, follow me at Evan Holladay and send me a DM.
Thank you so much, Evan. I can't thank you enough again, Dan. Generosity of this group. LifeBridge Capital. You can find my podcast, The Real Estate Syndication Show. Love to have you.
Podcast is Target Market Insights. It's available everywhere you listen to podcasts. You can catch it online at targetmarketinsights.com.
And the Real Estate Investing Foundation podcast, find us at urusiholdings.com and go there and find pretty much everything we're doing and where you can find the podcast. And you can follow me on Instagram at Jason Urusi, see a lot of the crazy running we're doing.
Awesome. Well, thank each one of you for being here today and sharing. Hope you have a good rest of your afternoon, and looking forward to continue to follow you. And feel free to reach out to me if you want me back on your podcast. And same thing with all the rest of these people. I'm sure we'd love to be able to share the love again and be on each other's podcast. So thank you guys so much for sharing, and I'll hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.